To receive weekly mailings of Rabbi Mansour's tapes or to sponsor a tape, call 718-375-1023. To hear Rabbi Mansour's daily halakha or to search the Rabbi's database of halachot, visit www.dailyhalacha.com. That's DAILYHALACHA.com. And now, Rav Mansour.
Beruchim Abayim, ladies. We're studying Parashat Shemini. Shemini literally means the eighth day. The eighth day of what? What is this eighth day? If you remember at the end of last week's Parashat, we learned about the 7 days that preceded the opening of the Mishkan. We've been reading, I don't know how many Parashiyot already, about the collecting money for the Mishkan, the construction of the Mishkan, and finally in this week's Parashah we read about opening day, that Moshe and Aaron got together and the Mishkan became functional. But 7 days before that, the Torah tells us Moshe every day had to build the Mishkan and then take it apart. And then in the morning he would build it and then take it apart. And then on the 8th day he built it and it stayed built for the duration in the Midbar. And the Hakamim tell us what's the lesson in that? Why make a 7-day pre-ceremony of erecting it and then taking it apart for 7 days? What does it symbolize? Rav Mansour Hirsch says it symbolizes the 7 different places where God rested His presence temporarily. For example, one of the places He rested Himself was the Mishkan, which was in the Midbar, which was in the desert. Then when the Jewish people came to Israel, there was the Mishkan at Shiloh, and then there was another Mishkan at Nov, and then there was a Mishkan at Givon, and then you had the first Beit HaMikdash, and then you had the second Beit HaMikdash. So there were different places where Shekhinah rested temporarily. Altogether there's 7 places. So hence, Moshe's building and taking apart the Mishkan alludes to the 7 temporary places that were eventually all destroyed. The 8th and final time that he erected the Mishkan represents the third Beit HaMikdash, which is going to be the ultimate resting place for Shekhinah, will never be destroyed. It was on this 8th day that Moshe and Aaron came into the Mishkan. Aaron, being the Kohen Gadol, walks in, looks at the Mizbeach, and jumps back. He got scared. The Midrash says, what did he see? The Midrash says the Mizbeach looked like an ox. It looked like a cow or a calf. So he said, oh, God's never going to accept my service as the Kohen. It's my sin of the Egel. I was involved in the Egel. I was the one that told him, bring me the gold. I was the one that threw it into the fire. I was the one that had a hand in it. And now I'm going to be the Kohen Gadol, and now I'm seeing flashbacks of the Egel at the Mizbeach. So he stood back. And Moshe Rabbeinu, his brother, says, no, Aaron, you have nothing to worry about. Out of all people, what you did with the Egel, you have nothing to worry about. Go right ahead. On the contrary, you're the best man for the job. So the rabbis asked the obvious question. Who's right and who's wrong? It seems Aaron's concerns are legitimate. He did have a hand in the Egel. I mean, he did have a certain amount of responsibility on him. And Moshe tells, no, don't worry about it. It's okay. If anybody could be the Kohen Gadol, it's you have nothing to worry about the Egel. On the contrary. The rabbis explain it. Why did Aharon not get killed when it came to the Egel? Remember we learned about Hur. There was another rabbi there. He died for the Egel. They came to Rabbi Hur. They said, Hakam, we want to build the Egel. He says, kill me. We're not building any Egel. So they killed him. How come Aharon didn't have the same self-sacrifice? He should have told the people, what, idolatry? You out of your minds? You want to do Egel? Kill me, I'm not letting you do it. It wasn't that he was scared to die. Hakamim tell us that Aharon made such a selfless decision, a decision of extreme self-sacrifice. He said, if they kill me, that means they're going to kill 2 people in one day, 2 rabbis. God will never forgive them. It'll be such a devastating sin for the Jewish people, they'll never recover. So Aharon made a decision at the time, I'm willing to sacrifice my olam haba, I'm willing to sacrifice my religious career, I'm willing to sacrifice my relationship with God, just so they won't kill me, in order to protect the people. At that moment, Aharon showed such love and such sacrifice for the people that he put them ahead of himself. Who has such courage? Who has such selflessness to forget about everything you're doing? You might be held accountable for it, but Aharon could say, at least they didn't kill me. God will forgive them for the egel, but he won't forgive them if they kill me also on the same day they killed Hur. So Moshe tells Aharon, you're scared? You're scared because of the egel? On the contrary, at the egel you proved yourself. At the egel you showed your true colors. You showed exactly what type of leader you are. You showed that the people come first. You passed the test of the egel. The people failed. But you showed yourself committed like nobody ever showed commitment. And therefore Moshe, on the contrary, you passed the egel with flying colors. And therefore you should not hesitate. On the contrary, walk to the Mizbeach proudly, because God has no problem with you being Kohen Gadol. But we may say another explanation. Aharon was a little scared to go to the Mizbeach because he remembered the Egel episode. We have a rule. If a person commits a sin, and then he's ashamed of his sin, even in the slightest way, he's embarrassed of what he did, and he feels a little guilt, the guilt itself is closure for the sin. The shame erases the sin. God looks at that feeling that you have. For example, if somebody in his life used to tell a story about how when they were young and they used to go to different places that were forbidden, and they used to always tell that story, and then when they get a little more religious, they say, what am I telling that story for? It's an embarrassing story now. What am I telling that? So in a social setting, he's about to tell a story when everybody's telling other stories about their wildness, and she controls, or he controls himself. I'm not going to tell that story. At that point over there, the only thing that controlled you was you were a little shame embarrassed. I'm going to tell a story now. We used to go here, we used to go there. For what purpose? It's a little shameful now. At that point, God says the sin is erased. Because you refrained because of shame. Aharon now is about to walk to the Mizbeach to serve. All of a sudden he says, how in the world can I be the one to serve God in the Mishkan if I had a hand in the Egel? Moshe Rabbeinu tells him at that point, bingo, exactly because of that. Because you have shame to walk to the Mizbeach, that's exactly why you earned the credit to walk to the Mizbeach. Because at this point, your shame and your humility and your guilt has earned you full atonement. Had Aharon would have walked straight to the Mizbeach without any compunction, had he walked to the Mizbeach and said, oh, I was chosen, okay, I have no problem, Moshe might have reminded him, hey, my dear brother, you have to remember, you did commit a sin of the Egel. How come you're so cavalier walking to the Mizbeach? But Aharon showed a very, very reserved attitude, an attitude of shame, and Moshe said specifically for that. It's a lesson to us also. Hey, we can't, we're all human beings, we all sin, including the speaker. But that being said, we have to be careful not to boast about our sins, or not to be proud about our sins. The fact that we keep our sins under our hat, and we don't go out of our way to expose ourselves for the iniquity that we do, that in itself can serve as an atonement. But there's a fascinating midrash on this story of the opening of the Mishkan. Many sacrifices were brought on the first day. So that tells us goats and calves and lambs and bulls and rams. All sorts of animals were brought on the inauguration day. The Midrash writes something cryptic. The Midrash says, why all the animals? So the Midrash says, to atone of the sin at the beginning and to atone at the sin of the end. Two sins, a sin in the beginning of history and a sin at the end of history. What two sins? So the Midrash says the sin in the beginning of history is the sin of the selling of Yosef. Remember the brothers sold Yosef? They had to atone for that. And the second sin at the end of history was the golden calf. So if you notice the sacrifices, one of the sacrifices was an egel. They worshipped an egel, now they brought an egel to atone. They dipped Yosef's ketonet pasim, if you remember, they dipped it in a goat, in goat's blood. And they went back to their father and said, oh, a wild animal ate him. So on that day, they brought a goat in order to atone for the goat that was involved in the charade of the sale of Yosef. I saw one of the rabbis ask the obvious question. I understand why on the opening day of Mishkan you need to atone for the egel. I mean, it just happened. It happened a couple of months before. The relationship was strained between God and the Jewish people. So it made sense. Let's finish the egel story. Let's bring a sacrifice. And Hashem will forgive us. But why rehash now what happened 1,000 years before with Yosef? What's the connection between the Mishkan and... it was wrong that they sold Yosef. But why now? Why rehash? Why bring up that story of the sale of Yosef on this momentous day? So a beautiful explanation. Fantastic explanation. I say it like this. What motivated the brothers to sell Yosef? It's clear that they were motivated by jealousy. Torah says it's black and white. But what motivated the jealousy? Torah also says black and white. Yaakov Abinu favored Yosef. How did that favoritism manifest? By the Ketoret Pasim. He made his son a special technicolor robe, and when they saw him wearing this technicolor robe, they said, well, that's an indication that he loves Yosef more than us, or that he's more special than us, and therefore he deserves to wear the robe, and that already got their emotions stirring, and from there they said, you think you're better than us because of the robe, and they went, and they sold him, and eventually the Jews went down to Egypt as a result of that story. Look at the brilliance of what God did on the first day of the Mishkan. He said this is a potential disaster what the Mishkan is going to cause. Here it's all over again. You have a tribe of Kohanim, a designated tribe of Israel that wears special garments. The Kohen Gadol wears garments that nobody else can wear. He has stones. He has a hat. He has a headband around his neck with God's name. What's going to happen on the opening day of the Mishkan? All the other tribes are going to see Aharon dressed in such ornate garments, in such unique garments, and that could already inspire jealousy. And now already jealousy will bring out the worst in the people, and now they'll resent Aharon. And the truth of the matter is, it's not so shocking. It happened. It happened. Years later, if you remember the story of Korach, Korach was a guy that got jealous. Why Aaron? Was he wearing the clothes? But at least on the opening day of the Mishkan, God wanted to remind the Jewish people, remember what happened with Yosef. Because Yosef got special garments, the whole world turned over. And people made mistakes and they let jealousy get the best of them. Atone for that today, in order that you don't make the same mistake. What's the lesson? The lesson is that just because the Kohen wears special clothes doesn't mean he's better than the next guy. Judaism teaches us that everybody has a role. Everybody has a job. And just because one job is not like somebody else's job does not make him better or worse. It's like an orchestra. Is there anybody more important in an orchestra than somebody else? You need a violinist, and you need a pianist, and you need the people blowing the horns, and you even need that guy with the triangle giving the ding, ding, ding 4 times in the concert, because that's part of the notes, that's part of the music, that's part of the sheet music. You need him there. So therefore, in an orchestra, if somebody's not there, so the piece doesn't come out right. So everybody's integral, different roles. Who's more important, the plumber or the electrician? Well, if you need your pipes are broken, so the plumber that day happens to be more important. But if you're having an electrical problem, so the plumber's worthless on that day, then the electrician is important. And so same thing with the mailman and same thing with the milkman. In life, nobody's the same and nobody has the same role. Men and ladies, the same thing. Different roles in life. And therefore, if Aharon gets to wear the clothes, it's because that's what his mission is. Does that make a Levi worse? No, you have a different job. What are you worried about? What are you jealous of him for? And we need you just as much as we need the next guy. And Mr. Yisrael, well, you don't wear the clothes and you're not a Levi, but trust me, we need you just as much as the next guy. Because your role is integral in the orchestra of God's master plan of creation. And therefore, nobody should be jealous. What is a person jealous of? It's not you. This is an important lesson to remember in marriage as well, where many people forget, and we've been influenced by the feminist movement, which is, again, an anti-Torah movement, that its core philosophy teaches us that ladies are equal to men. Not that they have different roles than men. That's what we teach. That's what normalcy teaches. You don't have to be a brain scientist to know this. They teach equality, meaning whatever a man can do, a lady should have the same right to do it. And therefore we have lady firefighters and ladies in the military and all sorts of... Obviously God created a man with a certain way, not right or wrong, and a lady with a certain way. Most problems in Shalom Bayit stem from the fact that the spouse does not understand the differences. A simple example. It's not a good one, but it's just to show you that it's in the genes. To me, as a man, I look at this table, to me it looks clean. But if a lady would look at this table, she'd say it's filthy. Well, how are you sitting on this table over here? So, now what is that? Where does that come from? So God made it in such a way, which is to our benefit, that a lady will have an extra sensitivity towards cleanliness. Because if you left cleanliness in the hands of a man, so Shema Yisrael will be living in a pigsty. As a rule. So thank God that the ladies have this extra sensitivity, so things are more perfect. I'll give you another simple example. It's not right or wrong. A man's concept of time is not the same as a lady's concept of time. Again, there's always exceptions. But it's possible that if a lady will tell her husband, I'll be ready at 7:30, in her mind, it's never 7:30. 7:30 is just a ballpark figure. And that can mean anywhere from 7:30 to 8:15 to 8:30. It's possible. It's possible. It's possible also 7:25. I'm not saying no. But as a general rule. And that's a good thing, by the way. As a man, you get nervous. I told her 7:30 every time I thought she never read it. Oh, relax. You want your wife to have a very flexible concept of time. That's what I told one man once. Why, Rabbi? I said, because it's going to serve you well. When your son wakes up at 2 o'clock in the morning and your wife will jump out of bed and go feed the baby, that's because she has a very flexible sense of time. A husband, when there's 2 o'clock in the morning, get up at work, have to go, have to sleep. But a lady's much sure the time is not an issue. So it can be 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock, 4. It'll serve you, so why do you want to change that? So put in your mind when she said 7:30, it means 8 o'clock, so you won't get nervous from the beginning. Men are different in the same way. Men like power, men like to make decisions. Is it right? It's not right, it's not wrong. It's a fact. If a lady doesn't know that, and therefore she always overpowers her husband and makes decisions, so the husband feels threatened because she's on his territory. And she doesn't understand that. Why can't I make the decisions? We're not saying that it's dictatorship, of course, but in certain things, the husband likes to know that he's the bottom line, that it's his verdict that makes. But if you don't know that, that that's what he needs, and that's what makes him happy, and that's the way God created him, so there'll always be a struggle. So that's what we're learning over here. Is Aharon better? He's not better. That's your job, Azag Baruch. The plumber is not better than the electrician, nor the mailman, nor anybody else. You need everybody to serve Borei Olam in their own capacity. That's why you needed to atone, specifically on the day that Aaron put on these new garments. Everybody had flashbacks. Oh, another story of Ketonet Pasim. The story of Yosef is happening again. Look at this, another guy want to wear clothes. He's special. God says he's not special. Atone for that sin of Ketonet Pasim, so this history will not repeat itself on the clothes of Aharon. As happy as that day was, that's how sad that day was. Undoubtedly from the saddest days in Jewish history. On that day, where everybody was celebrating, everybody was excited. It was a day that the Jewish people were anticipating and waiting for. There was a lot of excitement. You could imagine when God came down, after how many months of a shaky relationship after the Egel, and God finally came down to rest on the Mishkan. That was the Jews' understanding of acceptance, that it's over, that it's behind them. It was one of the happiest moments. And in the middle of that celebration and that joyous occasion, the sons of Aharon, the young sons, I say sons in plural, tragically died in the Mishkan serving God. And all of a sudden you saw two stretchers being brought out of the Mishkan, and you see the holiest men, the most righteous, the most noble children that earned to go into the Holy of Holies, and instantaneously God sent a fire down and they died. The story here is Aharon's reaction. Hard to explain this. I give an interpretation. Why is this supposed to happen? How do you explain the death of young people? This is, anybody that attempts to explain it already is talking too much. If you say one word to try to give an explanation, so already you're out of line already. And the interpretation is just supposed to be, you wave your hands up, because it's too deep for human comprehension to understand how that's good. Of course we have emunah, and of course we know Hashem doesn't make mistakes, but when it happens, that's good to talk philosophically. We know Hashem's great and He's doing perfect and everything Hashem knows. But when you see it, we know Hashem's great. But Rabbi, what's going on over here? The sons of Aharon dying was even more magnified because they were the greatest. They were, that's it. There's no shot for anybody. These guys are learning Torah, religion, everything. Aharon's reaction was classical, unprecedented in history. Torah writes, when he saw it, Vayidom Aharon, which literally means and Aharon was silent. That's the epitome of acceptance. He didn't question. I want to comment on the word Vayidom. It's a rare word in the Torah, Vayidom. The Torah might have written Vayishtok, Shatak, Vayaharish. There are other words to be silent. Why Vayidom? Vayidom comes from another Hebrew word called domem. Domem is an inanimate object. This table would be called the domem. A stone might be called a domem. Sometimes when a person's silence in the face of tragedy, he might not be able to express himself verbally, but you could look at his facial expressions and you could see him in pain. He might be wincing He might be grimacing. His eyes might be tearing. So even though he's not talking, but if you look at his face, it can give a lot of what's going on inside of him. You know, the facial features of a person, even without verbalizing anything, can tell us, is he really accepting it? Or maybe he's just too shocked and he's crushed. The Torah uses the word vayidom. That means Aharon was stone. He was stone-faced. It was such an acceptance that there was no facial expression that he had a problem with it. There was no tear, there was no grimace, there was no gloom. Don't ask how a man is able to reach such a level of acceptance, and it's not a cruelty, God forbid. Don't misinterpret it. I want you to remember who we're talking. You're talking about a very sensitive person, Aharon. This is the same Aharon that the Mishnah says on him, he was Ohev Shalom Verodef Shalom. He was a man of peace. He was a man of the people. This is the Aharon, mind you, that when he died, they cried for him for 30 days straight. Kol Bet Yisrael, every single Jew, he had a bigger eulogy than Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Aharon's good nature touched every single Jew. The ladies cried when he died. The children cried when he died. Because he was a person that when he saw two people fighting, he'd run to them and try to arbitrate. When he saw a couple fighting, he arbitrated. When he would see people make sins, it was Aharon that would go and embrace them. He was a people's person. He loved people. He was a peaceful man, so he was a sensitive man. It wasn't that he should have the impression that Aharon was a cold, old man that, was above these things and he didn't care. No, they died. Okay, that's what God wants, and he was tough. And it's on the contrary. He was from the softest people. That being said, with all his softness and all his sensitivity, Vayidom, his emunah was unshakable. It was stone-faced. It's an insurmountable level in our minds of emunah, and God forbid we should never be tested. And we say these ideas as no coincidence, as our community reels in from a great tragedy that some of us witnessed, some of us heard about young men in the community that passes away suddenly at a young age. And there is really no consolation for such a type of tragedy, and it's obviously too fresh to even try to make any sense. Ultimately, the answer is going to be emunah. We have a story that's told beyond us, these stories. Don't kid yourselves. And I don't want to give a false impression, Chas v'Shalom, that I'm holding by any of these lofty levels that I'm talking about. Of course, it's something that we aspire to. But at least you hear a story, it puts things in a different perspective. A rabbi called the Aderet. He was a very meticulous rabbi in the sense he never made people wait for him. He was a stickler by the time, especially when it comes to groups of people, to make them wait. It's Torah Sibur. He would never do such a thing. Once in his life, people waited for him. He had a son that died also very young. And at the funeral, when everybody gathered at the funeral and they're all waiting for the rabbi to come and deliver the eulogy, 2 hours he didn't show up. So out of character. Here's a man that comes by the clock, by the second, and he had 2 hours, he keeps a whole sibur waiting. So the students asked him, they said, Rabbi, what's the delay? He said, because we have a blessing that we have to make, God forbid, when somebody passes away. Baruch Dayan Emet. We bless God and we say, your judgment is right. Your judgment is truthful. There are no mistakes here. You know what you're doing. But we have another law that says that just as we must make a blessing on the good, we're also obligated to make a blessing on the bed. And the rabbis learn that the attitude that we bless God for good things must be the same attitude that we bless God for bad things. And he said, I remember when my son was born, and I remember standing in the hospital, and when my wife gave birth to the baby boy, he says, I got up and blessed God, Baruch Shehayanu v'kiyemanu v'gi'anu lezeman hazeh, and I was elated, and I was dancing for joy. And it took me now 2 hours to reach that same level of acceptance as when I made the Shehayanu when he was born, to have that same positive attitude to make the Dayan Emet when God took him away from me. These were great men that in a matter of hours, they were able to find themselves and navigate through the most complicated situations that life threw them, and navigate to emunah, and keep composure, and move on. There was a story told of the great sage Magid Mimezrich. Magid Mimezrich had some students that came to him and asked, how is it possible? How is it possible to bless God for the bad with the same attitude that you're blessing for the good? Give me what's the starting point? How do you reach such a level? So he said, I can't answer you this, but there is a rabbi that can answer you. Go to Rav Zushya, and he'll have the answer for you. So they go, they travel to the different cities. They finally find him. They walk in, they see a man with tattered clothes, living in a dilapidated home, dark and dingy, a sight to see, a sad sight. So they walk into the great rabbi and they say, the Magid ben Mezrich sent us to you. He says, yes, what's the dilemma? He told us to ask you and you will have the answer. How do you bless God for bad things like you bless him for good? So he said, the Magid ben Mezrich sent you to me? I have no bad in my life. I can't answer you this question. Go to someone who has bad. Without knowing it, the rabbi gave the final answer to that question. To him, whatever he was going through in his life, his perception, his attitude was that this is part of the prescription of life. Again, a level that's beyond many of us, including myself. But again, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a week from now, or it's a month from now, it's a year. Ultimately, the answer that's going to be said over is going to be emunah. And all these tests that happen in community are all, the only good thing that can come out of this, if there's anything good that can come out of it, is that at least some people will fortify the emunah in God and its opportunity to have a tinge, only a tinge of the attitude of a Haron, of a Yidom, of an acceptance, of a not to question God's ways, although they leave much questions to ask, but to have that conviction of emunah in God that He knows what He's doing. This is a appropriate lesson that we learn. Interesting, there's another time in Tanakh, one other time where the word Vayidom is mentioned. If you remember when Yehoshua ben Nun, the great conqueror, was very good. When he was going to conquer the city of Yericho, when they just came into Israel, there was a war, and it was Friday, and it was getting close to Shabbat, and he needed to finish the war, and you can't fight on Shabbat. So Yeshua went to the sun, and it says he told the sun to stop. He froze time to give him a couple hours to finish. So it says Vayidom HaShemesh, and the sun was silent. The sun stopped. So I saw from one of the rabbis, Vayidom Aharon, Vayidom HaShemesh. Don't think that Aharon's silence was because he was shocked. Some people don't react when they hear tragedy because they're dumbfounded. It's too overwhelming, the tragedy for them, so they're silent. They become frozen. Don't think that Aharon's silence was out of emotional instability or weakness. It was like the silence of the sun. Why did the sun stop on that given day? Because God wanted it to stop. It was fulfilling the will of God. Vayidom Hashemesh. Just like the sun stopped to fulfill the will of God, Vayidom Aharon. Aharon's silence was not out of weakness. It was in order to fulfill the word of God, which was on that day to take away his two precious children. And if we need to prove it one step further, which to me I find it amazing, whenever we retell over this story, it's quite humbling. It's quite humbling because we see our minuscule level in this world, where how far, how great these people are able to rise. That right after this episode, God appears to Aharon and he starts to talk to him. What should amaze us with that is, we have a rule. God does not appear to a person unless he's happy. Do you understand that? It means God, if a person is depressed, if a person is sad, if a person is despondent, God will not communicate to the prophet. A prerequisite for communication with Hashem is happiness. You have to be complete serenity. You're telling me that his two children just died. God can communicate him shortly thereafter and talk to him. What does that tell you about the stability of Aaron? What does it tell you about the character and the fortitude that he was able to maintain serenity and he was able to have that communication? I want to remind you. You forgive me if this is not from our most upbeat classes. I think as current events dictate in the world, that we must talk about these subjects only to, at least to myself, it's a chance to talk about these subjects to reinforce our own emunah, and we'll say it out loud so you can listen. It should be pointed out, a misconception in the world. People in the world are searching today for tranquility. People want peaceful lives, problem-free lives, no stress, no anxiety. This is again a product of American culture. We go to doctors and therapists and all sorts of different places in order to find tranquility in life. I'm sorry to tell you, ladies, it is not written anywhere or in any book that life is supposed to be tranquil. And therefore, to go search for tranquility, that life should be easy, it has never happened. And we don't know anybody that ever lived complete 100 years of tranquility without problems and without issues. To search for that island of tranquility where you have no problem, it never happened. So it's a futile attempt. I'm sorry to say, life is filled with problems. We can't change that. What we must search for is not tranquility, but for serenity. The rich man is the man that's able to deal with the problems of life with clarity, with peace of mind, without losing his state of mind, his relaxed state of mind, his clarity. That's what we're talking about. And only emunah, only true conviction and understanding there's a God in the world and that God is bound to you. God is bound to you. When God is bound to you means he's attached to me. It's a mistake when you ask your children, where's Hashem? And they point up. It's too far, he's much closer than that. Somebody asks you, where's God? You're here. He's here. He's in front of me. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. God is parallel to me constantly, 24 hours a day. So you know you're walking with God. He's attached to me. When I make a blessing, I say, Baruch Atah Hashem. The word Atah. Atah means you. If I'm talking to you, I say At. If I'm talking to a man, I say Atah. What does Atah mean? He's here. I can touch him. Atah. You're right in front of me. When I say a blessing, I say Baruch Atah. What does that mean? I'm talking to God. You're right here. You're not a million miles away. You're not sitting 7 galaxies high on some chair that's beyond. You're accessible. We're not subject to the whims of the world, ladies. The world doesn't happen by chance or coincidence. Not terrorists, and not government, and not wars. All these things are not on autopilot. All these things are directly being controlled moment by moment by God. One that does not have fear of God will fear everything else. But one that fears God, he has fear, but it's one thing. Everything else, like, oh, fear God, Hashem's in control. But if you don't fear God, Shema Israel, you fear everything. He can kill me, and he can destroy me, and he can damage me, and that can happen. The building could fall, the earthquakes. You're afraid of everything. But if you believe in God, Hashem's in control. And Hashem knows what he's doing. And most importantly, Hashem loves you. Unconditional love. Ahavat olam haftanu. Even if we sinned, God loves us. You have to know that. You have to walk in the street to know I have a connection with the most powerful God, the only God, the God that created the heavens and the earth. He's close to me, and he loves me, and he's out for my welfare more than my parents are out for my welfare, more than anybody, and he has the ability to control anything. There's such a feeling of just serenity. Okay, I'll put the ears of Hashem. And at times of tragedy, we have to remind ourselves that that's not a contradiction to what we're saying. The greatest tragedy is we should be saved, our ears should be saved, and our families should be saved. But it's not a contradiction to what we're saying. To end on a more positive note, ladies, in order that we don't spoil your day, the righteous ladies that came in order to hear Divrei Torah, I just want to as a side point out, this is where the blessing of our community comes from, as I want you to know. They once asked one of the rabbis, the study of Torah, what does it do? What does it do for the world? What does it do for community? What does it do for a neighborhood? He compared it to a cruise liner, to a ship. He said, the most important room on the ship is in the sub-basement, where you see many crew members shoveling coal into the furnace in order to fuel the ship so the ship can sail. The engine room. You see all sorts of machines making all sorts of noise, and on top of this ship you see everybody enjoying. Shuffleboard and tennis and all different types of leisure things, relaxation, walking. All those people are able to enjoy the blessings of the cruise because there are people in the engine room that are sweating and toiling to keep that ship afloat. Not too often do the men in the engine room get credit. Nobody even sees them. Nobody knows where they are. Ladies, I want to remind you, you are those people in that engine room. When you come here on a weekly basis to read Torah and hear the words of Torah, whatever time it is, you enter the engine room of Torah in the Midrash. Everybody else is outside, enjoying life, walking healthy, Baruch Hashem, breathing, Baruch Hashem, successful, shopping, and you're coming to do the work of pumping blessing into our community. And I have no doubt, and I believe this, I don't believe it, I know this to be true, that if there is blessing in our community, it's because of groups like this that are committed and devoted to the study of Torah. You don't realize that after 120 you should all live and be well. When we're going to go in front of God, He's going to tell all of you how many gezerot you stopped, how many bad decrees you were able to ward off because you came and studied Torah. God forbid, how many tragic things should have happened and didn't because of your commitment of learning. Gemara says Torah protects. And therefore, I commend you again for your commitment to come from your busy schedules to the trenches in order to sit and learn the words of Torah. You are the biggest beneficiary from the concepts that you're learning. Your families will benefit from the beracha. The Torah is like perfume. There's perfume now on your clothes. When you go home after a class and you take off your coat, you're dropping besamim on the floor. I was one rabbi would come home from a class, he'd lie down on his child's bed. I told him, what are you doing? I want beracha on my child. He's going to go to sleep. I want him to have the blessing of Torah. It sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds like we're talking, it's not so. These are facts. The Torah has that magic and has that ability. And therefore you should feel good that Baruch, if there's anything you can do, the greatest life insurance policy for our community is classes not only like this, there's no monopoly on Torah, classes like this, that people are coming, men, ladies, children, to study Torah. Ultimately, this is where the beracha is going to be. Keep up the good work, and may you all be blessed. Shabbat shalom.